Hello, family, and welcome back live from St. Peter's Square. We're here. It's Monsignor Roger Landry, the National Director of the Pontifical Mission Societies USA, Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News, and I'm Montse Alvarado, your President of EWTN News, and we're so glad to be here on this final day before tomorrow's very exciting events. And there's a little bit of a attitude of construction. Things are being tightened up, all those loose bolts, before we get into the really big ceremony tomorrow morning, that wonderful mass, and then a procession, and then the sealing of those doors. Well, we had a lot of work to do to get everyone up to speed on who those 133 individuals are.
Yes.
Coming from all over the world to gather and make the most consequential decision of this moment in our lifetimes and in the life of the church. And we're going to talk about the final group, which are the Canadian Cardinals. Before we get into the package, Monsignor Landry, are any of them eligible or papabile, or have you heard anything about them?
They're all very well thought of, but Archbishop Gerard Lacroix of Quebec City has been mentioned in a couple articles, but that's where it stopped. Frank Leo of Toronto, his successor, 52 years old. He's one of the dream candidates that some people mention, but it's almost impossible that it'll happen for
so young
52-year-old. And Archbishop Tom Collins, the Archbishop Emeritus of Toronto, is extremely well thought of, but at 78, many might think that he's a little bit too old. And so all of them are highly regarded, but none has been getting a lot of the attention yet here.
There's a lot, I think, that goes into that analysis and also their reputation. So let's go ahead and listen to that report from EWTN News on our Canadian electors.
The first Canadian cardinal in church history was elevated in 1886 by Pope Leo XIII. Known then as Lower Canada, the Archbishop of Quebec, Cardinal Elzéar Alexandre Taschereau, marked the country's inclusion in official church governance almost 20 years after the Canadian Confederation. Since then, no less than 25 men have served the church representing the country, and currently 5 are in the College of Cardinals, with only 4 serving as electors. 78-year-old Cardinal Thomas Christopher Collins from Ontario retired as Archbishop of Toronto in 2023. The only elector from Canada appointed by Pope Benedict, he is widely known for his defense of life and for upholding Catholic teaching. This will be his second conclave. A member of the Secular Institute Pius X, Cardinal Gerald Cyprien Lacroix, is 67 years old and the current Archbishop of Quebec. He's most known as one of the main liturgical and logistical hosts of Pope Francis's July 2022 visit to Canada during events in Quebec, including the Papal Mass at the Basilica of Sainte-Anne de Beaupré. In January 2024, Cardinal Lacroix was named in a class action lawsuit alleging he sexually assaulted a 17-year-old girl prior to his ordination as a priest. While the impartial canonical investigation cleared Cardinal Lacroix of wrongdoing and allowed his return to ministry, the civil lawsuit remains active. Cardinal Francis Leo is the youngest of the Canadian electors at 53 years old. He was elevated to the College of Cardinals in December 2024 and made the current Archbishop of Toronto, succeeding Cardinal Collins in 2023. Born in Montreal, Quebec, but with Southern Italian heritage, he previously served in the Vatican Diplomatic Corps, is a Third-Order Dominican, and co-founded the Canadian Mariological Society. The 6th youngest cardinal in the college, he will have a long tenure as an elector. The 78-year-old Jesuit Cardinal Michael Czerny was born in Czechoslovakia but emigrated with his family to Montreal, Canada in 1948 to escape communist persecution. As the prefect of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development and the founder of the Jesuit African AIDS Network, he is known for his advocacy on behalf of migrants, refugees, and environmental justice. He is closely aligned with Pope Francis's social mission. Although not eligible to participate in the conclave, French-Canadian Cardinal Marc Ouellet was elevated by Pope John Paul II and turned 80 in 2024. As the former prefect of the Congregation for Bishops from 2010 to 2023, he held one of the most influential positions in the Roman Curia and is likely to draw on many of his personal relationships. He was considered a contender for the papacy in a 2013 conclave. Almost 30% of the Canadian population identifies as Catholic, according to Canadian census numbers. And while the eastern provinces boast a majority Catholic population, the Western Catholic community, particularly in Alberta, British Columbia, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, account for close to 3.5 million Catholics, an opportunity that the next pontificate might consider. At the Vatican, Benedict Cedergren for EWTN News.
Monsignor Landry, it seems to me, especially listening to those last numbers about the representation of Canada, such a large country, not necessarily such a large population when you think about the territory, is that an opportunity for the next Pope to think about the Anglophones in the western part of the country that are not necessarily represented here and that probably live the church a little differently?
In the past, there have been cardinals in Western Canada that have been included here. So it's always a possibility. The hope would be that Canada is going to be well represented by the cardinals that are already there proportionately with regard to other parts of the world. But Canada has a lot to give, and they've had such a rich Catholic history. For the Northeast, for example, and the upper Midwest, they were evangelized by those coming down from Canada. So Catholics in the United States of America have a lot of gratitude for their brothers up north.
And you know the American Martyrs Shrine, the North American Martyrs Shrine is there too, right?
So there are 2 shrines to the North American martyrs. 5 of the 8 North American martyrs died in Midland, Ontario, including most famously Saint Jean de Brébeuf, and 3 of the North American martyrs, Saint René Goupil, Saint Jean de Lalande, and most famously Saint Isaac Jogues, the first priest who ever set foot in present-day New York State and then New York City, and died as a witness to the power of the Eucharist, which he was trying to bring to the Mohawks. That's in Auriesville, New York, about 3 hours north of New York City. And so it's a great missionary heritage that evangelized Canada, and the same started the evangelization in the northeastern part of the United States.
Matthew, we've seen a lot of outcome from Pope Francis's visit to Canada. That was something that came with a lot of pomp and circumstance, but also quite a bit of controversy because of the relationship with the Indigenous people there. Tell us a little bit about the impact of that visit.
Yeah, well, so Pope Francis went ostensibly with one goal in mind, which was to sort of repair relations, or at least to give a very formal apology to the Indigenous peoples of Canada. There is a long and very remarkable history of evangelization among them, including, we were talking about the North American martyrs, the Black Robes. The work that they did in Canada was extraordinary. And, of course, the famed conversion of Kateri Tekakwitha, who is one of the great saints to emerge out of North America.
Beautiful saint.
Exactly. So there is that legacy, but then there's also the legacy of how the church, but also how other Christian denominations dealt with the Native Americans. And then we had the whole schools question as well, and then the immense controversy that surrounded the claims, later thoroughly debunked, of massive graves of Native American children in different parts of Canada. But Pope Francis's goal there, again, was to reach out to them, to give that apology, as he did elsewhere. And one of the most memorable images was him praying before the body of water. And it was memorable for 2 reasons. One, it was a classic Francis gesture of him sitting in prayer and apology. But then the other was, it was one of the first times that we saw him at a major event in a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. So it was an interesting benchmark looking back. That this was a moment where some of it turned, because he had been very reluctant to use a wheelchair previously.
Monsignor Landry, why would the church take on something that is not her fault? That apology, like you said, completely debunked. There were no mass graves from these residential schools. Why would our church, why would she take this on and offer an apology to move forward?
Most of the problems in Canada were driven by government policy. They were founding these schools, taking children out of their families, putting them in these residential schools, and turning the administration of it in general over to the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, over to the Catholic Church. The Oblates served very well. There could have been more of a prophetic voice of the Church at that time. The sins were not those of commission so much as omission. We have a huge respect for the family, and we should have spoken out more forthrightly when kids were being ripped out of their homes in order to be taught the 2 official languages of Canada, in addition to every other thing that they'd learn in a school. And so Pope Francis went repentant. People recognized that the church wasn't the protector. It should have been, even if it were not, the malefactor. And so there were really hurt feelings over the course of time. When they would come to the United Nations when I was there, they were constantly asking us to pass on a message to Pope Francis to come to Canada and to condemn a decree that's 500 years old. Those were always the requests. And when they met with the Holy Father, they brought that same petition. And so the Holy Father, with great kindness and a big heart, said, sure, I will come to Canada. And it was one of his longest visits when he was already going into a wheelchair. And it was grueling on him. But he had a particular solicitude for those who had been wounded, and he wanted them to hear those words, we're sorry for what happened to you, for whatever complicity we had, but just the very fact that you, sons and daughters of the church, have suffered so much, I wanted to come as the father of the family to say I'm with you. It's one of the most powerful visits of his 12 years as Pope.
Absolutely. Well, I know we've got Colin Flynn in the square. He's getting ready to give us a report of what it feels like in this, as we would say, víspera, this vigil, before we step into this moment in prayer, of course, and with all of the cardinal electors that will be making this big decision. Colin, what are you seeing out there? What is it that you feel? Is it electric in any way? This anticipation?
Monsi, it reminds me of the old story. 'Twas the night before conclave, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a cardinal. And actually, as I'm standing down here in the square, if you turn around, Monsi, now, and you look behind you, I'll wave at you because I can see you. I can see you from the distance, and I'm giving you a nice big wave up in your studio because I'm down here. Now, I'm not in St. Peter's Square because journalists have to stop at the line that divides the state of Italy to the state of Vatican City. So just behind this fence, that is Vatican City State, that is St. Peter's Square in the beautiful Basilica. And as you can see, the atmosphere down here is one of anticipation and, dare I say it, there is excitement. Of course, when you talk to people, they keep reminiscing about Pope Francis and their memories, and people say, oh, I was here on holidays, I came as a tourist, and then I just happened to be here when the Pope passed away. But then also, of course, they talk about the future and who's next and who could it be, and this is the person that I've heard, and what about this person? So all these names are being bandied around. What I can't believe, Monsi, is right behind me you just have some of the world's media. I've seen TV crews from Australia, from the United States, of course, from Germany, from Austria, from New Zealand, from all over. What that is down to, this huge international interest, probably a mix of a lot of things. Of course, pop culture with all the movies that have been out recently, that has ignited an even greater interest in this conclave. But I think there just is a general curiosity from people. I think they realize this is much more than some sort of election that they would see in their own home countries, that there is a spiritual element driving this, and that is what makes it even more fascinating. I think they know the odds are even higher, the stakes are higher. In fact, I met a couple just a moment ago from Florida. Patrick and I, the cameraman, we were saying hi to them, and they were just, they said it was such a beautiful atmosphere to be here. There is a feeling of goodness in the air, that something great is about to happen. You know, when that will happen, we don't know. But come tomorrow, when we will be doing these lives to you, Monsi, we'll be standing here, and like you and like the rest of the world, we'll be watching that small chimney right up there, which I can see now, the sun just going down behind it on top of the Sistine Chapel. Come back to me in a few minutes, Monsi. I'm going to say hi to some people here who have gathered from all over the world. But for the meantime, I can see you up there, but I'm going to point over here and hand it back to you.
Wonderful. Well, we'll wave at you too from here. I don't know if you can see me, but it's wonderful. We'll see you in a couple of minutes. Yes. And it's true what Colin is saying about the idea that people are here in hope. It's no coincidence that it's the Jubilee of Hope. That's what Pope Francis wanted for us. He wanted to be remembered as a Pope of joy with the first writing that he gave us, that first gift of that reflection on what it means to be joyful. I do want to wrap up one thing about the Canadian Cardinals, and that's something that you said yesterday that I thought was really striking, Monsignor Landry, this idea of having to be squeaky clean. And we did hear in the report about Cardinal Lacroix, which those allegations were also debunked. I know that the civil trial continues, but there was a wonderful impartial investigation that cleared him. Is there anything else like that that we are hearing about? Is that something that the general congregations are discussing?
They are concerned when they're considering candidates whom they don't know personally for many years, that there wouldn't be anything in their backgrounds that could embarrass the whole church if they were elected. And so they're asking deeper questions than have been asked in past centuries. We remember that there have been popes over the course of time who arrived to the seat of Peter with a lot of personal baggage known to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're living post-scandal, where we have higher expectations for the one we call Holy Father. We likewise want them to be contagiously and inspiringly holy, to help us all follow Christ's call to be holy too. And so those are bigger questions. I would say with regard to Cardinal Lacroix, it's so easy for a false accusation to be made, and we shouldn't just take a false accusation as ipso facto smoke before some type of fire. Sometimes it can just be people blowing hot air.
I think it's an important reminder.
Exactly, and there was a perfect example of how seriously we take almost any allegation now. It's investigated. The cardinal stepped aside from service until it was conducted, and then he was cleared. But you were talking about a jubilee of hope, and relating to the Canadians, this is very reminiscent of something in Pope Francis's apology, very reminiscent of something that Pope St. John Paul II did in the great jubilee of 2000. As we began this new millennium, he issued as part of all of his statements and aspirations for this new millennium to issue an apology for all of the harm and the damage that might have been done over the centuries in the encounter that happened between indigenous peoples and others with the church, but especially in so many ways that the church became tied up with some of the grand colonial enterprises of history. So this type of an appeal, this apology, is well in keeping that Pope Francis did with what we have seen before, especially John Paul II.
The church is comprised of sinners, and so St. John Paul II, March 12, 2000, I was here for it, gave that apology for what the sons and daughters of the church have done over the course of time. It's a part of our history. The far greater part of the history we see on the top of all these columns throughout St. Peter's Square. The real columns of the church are the saints who are still alive. Those are the ones who truly make salvation history. But part of our history, too, is sinners being called to conversion and to holiness.
Well, Colum mentioned not even a cardinal around, right? It's very quiet.
Yeah, I now have a weird version of A Christmas Carol lodged in my brain.
I
So
know.
this is
He did that well, though. I think he did it well. Knowing that today was not just the 12th General Congregation, but also for some of them, move-in day, which
Yes.
we know was done by either by picking their straws or by lot, which seems to be kind of a democratic way that this conclave has
Well, we're going to be
moving.
hearing a lot more about drawing about lots in the next couple of days, but yes.
That's exactly right. Well, some of them have been sly, avoiding the press, and some of them have not. And I know we have some images that we can share with our wonderful EWTN family just about what it looks like for them walking in and out. They are accosted by the press. We have over 4,000 members of the press accredited with the Holy See, the Sala Stampa, and I think 1,400 that stayed. 4,000 for the Jubilee and 1,400 that stayed for the conclave. So there is a lot there. You see Cardinal Leo and Cardinal Collins, who we just mentioned, Collins mentoring Leo for this second conclave of his. And of course, I'm actually, can you ID this cardinal? Because I can't.
He moved too fast, but I know we know this.
Oh, that's Chomali from Chile.
He
Yes.
was the cardinal from Thailand.
Oh, there you go.
Very difficult name. And I think nobody's going to vote for him because I don't think anybody could possibly know his name.
It's just
No,
too hard
let's
to
write
mention him.
Thailand.
Well, for our family that's listening on radio, I think it's also important to note that when a cardinal is seen by the press, they allow them to take their picture. But I think it's only Chomali who's really that excited about sharing with the press his personal experience. It's his first time here since being elevated a cardinal. And it's just such a beautiful and exciting reflection of what it means to be with his brother cardinal. So I know we've enjoyed just watching how they've evolved as well in deepening their faith.
And the cardinals are at such a terrible disadvantage because if you are walking the streets of Rome in that cassock with that scarlet, you can be seen from about a mile. I think you can be seen from space. And everyone comes flocking. In fact, I think we can say that over the last few weeks, we ourselves have flocked towards some cardinals to do interviews.
Of course we have. And I do have to give credit for those photographs to Jeff Bruno, who was the official EWTN photographer for the National Eucharistic Congress and gave those beautiful images of thousands of people, 60,000 people in adoration on their knees before the one true Lord, the real presence. It's just fantastic. So I want to make sure
we have to
that
do
we
a plug
mention
for the
him.
book.
Oh, yeah, that's true. He has a photo coffee table book that's also fantastic. So just beautiful to see the EWTN team, by virtue of the generosity of our friends and family members, that they can be here to bring these images and these moments to the world. All right. There was business today in the general congregations. Monsignor Landry, what was most notable about their discussions?
So I was told yesterday by a cardinal that about 15 were left to speak. 26 ended up speaking. So what that means is overnight or this morning, 11 more cardinals felt urged to speak before it was all over. And so that was a maximum of the amount of speeches that have taken place during any of them. Wide variety of topics. Many of the cardinals talked about the continuity, for example, of certain of the initiatives of Pope Francis. But then others brought up the types of concerns that people have said about improvements they'd like to see coming out of Pope Francis' pontificate. In a particular way, some of the financial stuff here in the Vatican, some of the relationships between what happens here in the Vatican and bishops and dioceses all across the globe, to make sure that it's a good bilateral relationship rather than one-sided. Lots of topics there.
Two that kind of jumped out when I was looking at the summary. The first was they had a discussion about martyrs. So here we were talking about the North American martyrs and the role of martyrdom in the life of the church, and how, I mean, as cardinals, they are expected ad sangue offusionem, themselves, to live the faith so heroically up to the shedding of blood. But the other one that I thought was especially interesting is that they expressed a desire that in the future, consistories, in other words, the gathering of cardinals, be, shall we say, more fulsome, more helpful, of greater duration. One of the hallmarks of Pope Francis's pontificate is that he almost never brought all the cardinals together. And I think they're looking around right now, they don't know each other, did not know each other just a week ago. So I think this experience has reminded them of how important it is for the next pope, and they know he's sitting in the room, to make these consistories much more agreeable and much more useful for the cardinals.
It's probably worthwhile to explain to our viewers and listeners why that would be.
That's exactly where I was going to go.
Under St. John Paul II and under Benedict, whenever they would make new cardinals, they'd convoke all the cardinals of the world for a couple days of meetings before. Pope Francis did that at the beginning of his pontificate, especially when he was trying to pass some initiatives, and he had Cardinal Casper speak to everybody about a particular application of mercy toward those who were divorced and remarried. And the cardinals gave him very blunt feedback that the direction of Cardinal Casper was not the direction they thought that the church should go. And so that was really the last of these meetings. So unfortunately, Pope Francis didn't allow the cardinals to get to know each other the way previous papacies have. And that's one of the issues facing the cardinals now. Yesterday, Cardinal Sacco, the Patriarch of Baghdad, was saying that he thinks that the conclave is going to be longer because they've just got to get to know each other.
Right.
In previous conclaves, they had much more opportunity to get to know why each other ticks, what their greatest concerns are, what their greatest passions are, whether they would be capable one day to be St. Peter's successor.
Yeah, and the closest that we came to anything like that again in the pontificate was, I think, in 2022 when he brought all of them together. But it wasn't really, it was a consistory, but they weren't meeting together like they did in 2014-15. It was basically to instruct them on Francis's vision for synodality. And there were a lot of complaints at that point that why aren't we given a chance to talk to each other?
Well, before we go back to Colum, I just want you to kind of clarify a little bit. Did COVID play any kind of role in that, in kind of not allowing for the time that would have been spent in gathering the cardinals to kind of continue in that tradition, to just kind of fall out of practice?
It would be hard to argue that. Clearly, COVID shut the world down for a while, but there had already been the precedent set prior that Pope Francis wasn't convoking the cardinals as Popes Benedict and Pope St. John Paul II did in order to confer. And so I'm not sure that COVID could be used as an excuse.
Yeah, it's a great question, because if we look at the sequence of consistories, there's basically only 1 year missing. So yes, he still had those opportunities even coming out of COVID.
Okay, well, let's see if we can get Colum back, and if he's got some pilgrims who have come in not just for the Jubilee, but to watch for that chimney smoke.
Monsi, indeed I have. We were walking around talking to people. We met some people from Argentina. We met some people from my home country of Ireland. And then I met Madeline, who was from England.
Yes, I'm from England.
But
I live in Belgium.
in Belgium. And you just got here today.
I just arrived today. I decided last week to book flights and come and see what it was like.
So it's one thing to stay at home and watch it on TV as a faithful Catholic. What made you want to actually make the journey, the pilgrimage, and come here?
I thought it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be here during the conclave. And I'm a teacher and I have a week of holiday.
A week of holiday. So you were like, what? And I know you went to the beach today as well. So
yeah.
you've
So,
turned it into a holiday.
exactly, yeah.
Before we came on air, you were saying that you remember the night you weren't here, but watching it on television when Pope Francis was brought out to the balcony behind us. You still remember that? Why?
I don't know, I think it really impacted me. We were watching it as a family at home and suddenly they announced this Pope and we had no idea who it was and we were quite excited. And yeah, I guess if you grow up in a Catholic family, it's a big thing, a new Pope.
How do you feel as a young Catholic practicing today, coming from England in Belgium? I know it's not the easiest of times always.
No, it's not easy being a Catholic at the moment, but I think and I hope that the new Pope will continue a bit the same kind of things as Pope Francis, especially with the poor and those excluded from society. That's what
His outreach to those in the
Yeah,
peripheries, which he was so remarkable at doing.
and the climate. I think that those two things are really important that Pope Francis did. So
For young people, that's such an important issue, isn't it? Yeah, that we've been hearing from. So what's your plan, by the way, here in Rome? Obviously, you spent some time relaxing today. You've come here. I presume this is not your first time at the Vatican.
no, it's not my first time in the Vatican. My plan is to come tomorrow evening to watch the smoke and also on Thursday and to hope that by the time I leave on Friday there's a new Pope, but we never know.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how committed are you? I mean, will you sit there and watch smoke after smoke if it's black and black?
I might. I've got some good books. I might. I haven't decided yet. And if it's sunny, I guess why not?
How did your friends react when you said, we have a week off from school, I'm heading to Rome to watch the conclave to see how this goes?
I had a couple really motivated and then one who booked flights with me and cancelled yesterday, so I'm alone.
You're alone?
Yeah.
You've made this pilgrimage on your own?
Yeah.
Well, listen, Madeleine, it has been a pleasure talking to you, and you're so kind because you were so radiant when you came over and you said, excuse me, do you know where the chimney is? You were sussing, you were doing a recce. If I'm coming tomorrow, where's the chimney? You were sussing it out.
I was checking it out already.
Yeah, and then I said, hey, can we come on EWTN in a few minutes? And you were like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And I said, there they are up there. Patrick, swing the camera around. We can see the back of them there in the studio. See them up there. Look, they are waving. And yeah, there's the gang. So, Madeleine, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And guys, we'll hand it back to you in studio.
Thanks so much, Colum. Wow, what a beautiful witness of someone motivated by their faith with a little bit of time to watch for that smoke and continue that tradition with their family. What an incredible time. I do think it's remarkable, though, for her to mention that it's not so easy to be Catholic. Monsignor Landry, do you encounter that on your travels too? People who just come and say, well, I'm Catholic, but it's really a difficult time for us.
I just finished 2.5 years as the Catholic chaplain at Columbia University in New York City, and it wasn't easy for the students to become Catholic there and to remain Catholic proudly. But that's what Jesus asked us to sign up for. He said, as they treated him, they treat us. We shouldn't suppose that our Christian life is going to be a downhill slide and that the cross Jesus asked us to carry is going to be made out of styrofoam covered in velvet with wheels on it. Sometimes there are going to be splinters in the rest. And Jesus prepares us through some of the sacrifices that we have to suffer to be his faithful disciple, because love shows itself when it's challenged. And God bless Madeline. She was challenged.
Yeah.
When her friend, as we just heard, canceled the last day, it could have discouraged normal young people, but intrepidly she still came, and I think God's going to bless her. Probably not by as short a conclave as you think, but God's going to bless her just by being here. Hey, she's just met the guy who's made on the conclave before Christmas.
There you go. That's exactly right. Well, Matthew, I want to ask you a couple of things about business, but I just want to remind our EWTN family that Colum is going to be on the square every single day when we have an option of seeing smoke. He's on chimney watch, as I want to call it, and he will be there in the square making sure that we have the reactions from all of our families so that we can really feel that community, both spiritual and physical, as we wait in anticipation for this moment and get the news that really is going to mark the next couple of years for all of us. It's going to mark some people's the rest of their lives. Well,
and
Matthew,
pointing people to the Sistine Chapel.
100%. That's 100%. That's very true. Well, today, all of the people who are going to be kicked out when those doors are shut and they say, what do they say?
extra omnes.
Extra omnes. When that is said and that moment comes, a couple of people are going to be rushed out, but they're still going to be under oath. What is that oath about, and how was it executed today?
Well, as you can imagine, organizing a conclave, because they're at the Casa Santa Marta, because there are people who work in the Vatican, there are people who prepare meals, we're going to be serving the meals, we're going to be helping to clean and everything else. All of them have to be subject to the same secrecy, basically, as the cardinals. So they are given an oath, and they did that today in the same chapel where the procession is going to begin tomorrow, in the Pauline Chapel in the Apostolic Palace. So they took an oath, and then one by one, in exactly the same way that the cardinals will tomorrow, a little more dramatically, I think, tomorrow.
Yes.
They
in front of the world.
In front of the world. They went up, they put their hands on the gospel, and they took that oath. And they basically promised, as God is their judge, that they will honor this pledge of secrecy, knowing full well that by the terms of the rules, they could be subject, depending upon how severe the betrayal is, to excommunication.
Excommunication. Wow, I love that word, betrayal. This is really, because it would be. It
It
would be
is.
a betrayal to every single member of this global family that is waiting for this and counting on them to do what is right. Well, other things happened today as well, Monsignor Landry, the destruction of the very well-known Fisherman's Ring. What's the significance of the ring and why the destruction, and how does it happen?
So historically, the fisherman's ring would be used to seal documents. When you'd put that hot wax and you'd seal it, that's what it is. Now, often, it is what's reverenced when people come up to the Holy Father. Pope Francis sometimes was resistant to allow his fisherman's ring to be kissed out of humility. But once the papacy is over, it needs to be destroyed so that nobody would be able to go back, for example, and forge documents anachronistically that had the seal of Pope Francis. So traditionally, you have somebody come on in, it's immediately removed from his finger after he's pronounced dead. But then in the presence of all the cardinals, it's officially destroyed together with the seal of the papacy.
And how they destroy it has changed a little bit over the centuries. They used to take a bit of a little hammer to break it. Now they simply deface it, which is something that they did, I know, at the end of the pontificate of Pope Benedict the 16th.
Why the change?
Just, I think, partly you can keep the integrity of the ring while still defacing it. So I think in some ways it's a more respectful act rather than the sort of brutal finality of taking a hammer.
It feels
to it.
very violent to take a hammer to this beautiful ring.
There's been a history of what we call iconoclasm that we have to take seriously, where things that were sacred were just smashed. A lot of the older Catholics remember jackhammering marble altar rails and marble altars. So there is that type of brutality that the church doesn't want to have perdure.
Yeah, preserving that doesn't seem like a great idea. Well, the beauty and the preservation of the wonderful traditions in the church couldn't be exemplified in a better way than by what is being done in the Sistine Chapel. That incredible just dressing up and cleaning up and getting ready. And I know that we had some images shared by Vatican Media. Matthew and Monsignor, would you explain what it is that we're going to show in terms of the rooms and the spaces and how they've been prepared?
So this is a site, it seems to me, into the Stanza delle Lacrime, or the Stanza del Pianto, the crying room, it's called, which doesn't have children in it, like in some of our parishes, but where the popes go immediately after they've been selected in order to try on one of these 3 different sized cassocks, and then put on their rochet and their mozzetta and their stole in order to be able to go out and receive first the cardinals, and then come on out to the balcony, the Loggia della Benedizione. And so this is the first place a newly elected pope goes and from which he emerges.
It's more simple than I think people would imagine. And also,
It is.
since people can't come in and out, they all have to be there and ready to go for him to try on, vest, and
so
move.
geographically or topographically, it is right off from the Sistine Chapel itself. And I note that they have the 3 traditional cassocks, of small, medium, and large. There are many historical stories. When I think of Albino Luciani when he was elected as John Paul I, they gave him the smallest that they could find, but as they joked, he was swimming in it. But he was still Pope. And I've noticed, too, that they are offering all of the mozzetta, for example, that Pope Francis chose not to wear to make that symbol. And then we move into the Sistine itself, and we can begin to see the magnificent artistic and spiritual legacy of a conclave set in this particular environment.
And it looks like they're seated in order. You saw Parolin's name and then Filoni, so they're seated in order of seniority, which maybe is a good thing or a bad thing in terms of fostering conversations.
Well, it certainly is in terms of keeping the order inside the conclave when they're voting. Everybody knows who's where. And when we see the lottery balls in a second coming on up, we'll see that they'll be easily able to be identified. When those come on out, 9 at a time, 3 for the scrutineer, 3 for the infirmarians, 3 for those who review the election, everybody knows exactly where they're seated.
So as a visual cue, one of the things to pay attention to, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow, is that there is a very precise order of precedence, basically based on seniority. So how long you've been a cardinal, how long you've been a cardinal deacon, how long you've been a cardinal priest, and how long you've been a cardinal bishop. So there is a very specific order, and it corresponds exactly to the lots that will be drawn. So the first one would be Cardinal Parolin, the last one, Cardinal Kuvakad.
Who is also our fabulous doorkeeper.
Yes, he is. Yes. So he is the most junior of the cardinal deacons, so he'll be basically at the back of the line. But as I was thinking, boy, he's 133, but he's still in the room.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And this is an unprecedented confirmation. The last time it was just in what we would call choir stalls, 2 rows on both sides facing each other. There are 16 more cardinals voting this time, so they had to put 3 rows on both sides in the back part of the sanctuary area of the Sistine Chapel. So we've never seen a confirmation like that. And when the photos came out today, that made my eyebrows raise.
Yeah, it's something very interesting to watch how this new composition, more people in the room, forces us to be creative. I think beautifully, Catholically, our Catholicity shines in that creativity.
Right.
Trying to create order out of something that feels a little rambunctious. That's how.
And trying to create order out of what is a new challenge.
Yes.
Because this has grown extensively. The last time there were 115 cardinal electors, now we have 133. We don't know how many might be in the next conclave. There could be more than that. So they're trying to solve logistical problems, but they're still doing it in a very respectful and I'd have to say very elegant way.
Well, we talked about one room that's off to the side, very important. But I think that one of the curiosities that many journalists have, and I share in that curiosity, is what happens when they need to use the restroom. They are locked in there. Monsignor Landry, where do they go?
So it was a question that I asked cardinals today, because when you read the 2 documents that guide everything, the Constitution, Universi Dominici Gregis, or the Ordo Rituum Conclavis, the order of the ritual of the conclave, it doesn't say anything about restrooms.
And or bathroom breaks.
Yes, and there are no restrooms in the Sistine Chapel. So as Matthew was saying, if you look at the Last Judgment, on the left is the crying room that we just described. On the right, there's a staircase. That's the way most people enter the Sistine Chapel when they're doing a tour of the Vatican museums. And if you go down those steps, that's where the cardinals will be able to find their restrooms. And they do have bathroom breaks, and they are able to go. And there aren't the visitors coming to the Sistine Chapel or the Vatican Museum in those parts, so that they're able to go there without having to wait in line.
Well, I think that we're going to get into all of these details with a little more explanation. So let's watch our Conclave Explainer, which Dr. Matthew Bunson has helped to put together to get us into the mood of understanding the rules and the regulations that order this wonderful gathering.
While the secrecy surrounding the election of a new pope through a conclave is often touted, the rules that govern every moment of this global event are available to everyone in a document called an Apostolic Constitution, with the full Latin title of Universi Dominici Gregis, meaning the shepherd of the Lord's whole flock. The current conclave rules build on centuries of traditions and previous election decrees, and was first issued in 1996 by Pope St. John Paul II, and superseded the rules on papal elections issued in 1975 by Pope St. Paul VI. The decree remains in effect for this conclave, with minor changes being made by Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis. Apostolic constitutions are the most solemn form of legislation issued by a pope, showing the gravity that is taken in holding conclaves. Pope Benedict XVI restored the requirement of a 2/3 majority for the election of a pope in 2007, and Francis simplified the funeral rite and modified the verification of the death of a pope. This critical document has 2 parts: the protocol for doing the necessary administrative work of the Holy See in the period between popes, as well as the rites for a papal funeral. The second part explains the rules of the actual conclave and protocols surrounding the papal inauguration. To vote in the conclave, a cardinal must be under the age of 80. That means that at the death of Pope Francis, 135 cardinals out of more than 250 were eligible to take part. 2 cardinals have so far announced they will not be participating for reasons of health, so the conclave will be attended by 133 cardinal electors. Cardinals over the age of 80 have been excluded from voting since 1970. On the appointed day, in this case the afternoon of May 7th, the cardinal electors will process solemnly from the Pauline Chapel in the Apostolic Palace into the Sistine Chapel. There, each elector will take an oath to observe the procedures and maintain secrecy. Each of the cardinal electors, according to their order of precedence, will then take the oath in Latin, declaring as they place their hand on the gospel their name, adding, "I do so promise, pledge, and swear, so help me God and these holy gospels which I touch with my hand." With the famed command extra homines, or everyone out, by the papal master of ceremonies, the doors of the Sistine are closed, and only the cardinal electors remain together. As the name suggests from the Latin cum clave, with the key, the cardinals are ceremonially locked in the chapel, a practice in use since 1274. From the start of the conclave until its end, they have no contact with the outside world until a new pope is chosen. The process for the voting is very detailed. First, cardinals are drawn by lot to serve in one of 3 capacities: 3 scrutineers who will oversee the balloting and the initial count, 3 infirmari who have the duty of taking a ballot in a box under lock and key to and from a sick cardinal who cannot attend the vote in the chapel, and 3 revisers who check the work of the scrutineers. With each voting session in the morning and the afternoon, new sets of scrutineers, infirmari, and revisers are chosen. The cardinals vote by filling out a ballot. At the top is printed in Latin, "Eligo in summum pontificem," or "I elect as supreme pontiff." Each cardinal elector writes the name of his candidate, disguising his handwriting, and then folds the ballot. In order of precedence, each elector comes forward, holds it up so that it can be seen, and carries it to the altar. There, before the scrutineers, he places it on a paten or gold plate that covers a chalice or appropriate receptacle. Before the altar and beneath the gaze of Michelangelo's Last Judgment, the cardinal elector says out loud the following oath in Latin: "I call as my witness Christ the Lord, who will be my judge, that my vote is given to the one who before God I think should be elected." He then places the ballot on the plate and then drops it into the receptacle. He bows to the altar and returns to his seat. After the ballots are completed and the infirmari return with any ballots, the first scrutineer unfolds each ballot, notes the name of the person chosen, and passes the ballot to the second scrutineer, who, in his turn, notes the name of the person chosen and passes the ballot to the third scrutineer, who reads it out in a loud voice. The last scrutineer, as he reads out the individual ballots, pierces each one with a needle through the word eligo and places it on a thread. After all the names have been read out, the ends of the thread are tied in a knot, and the ballots are set aside. The revisers then certify that all of the ballots have been counted correctly. If the vote is inconclusive, the ballots are set aside and a second vote for either the morning or afternoon session takes place. The ballots are burned at the end of the vote. If, however, a second vote is to take place immediately, the ballots from the first vote will be burned only at the end, together with those from the second vote. Black smoke means no candidate reached a 2/3 majority and the voting must continue. White smoke means a new pope has been chosen. On day 1, the cardinals can cast 1 ballot. On days 2 and 3, they cast 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. On day 4, if no successor is chosen after those 9 ballots, the electors break for as long as 1 day for prayer. Then the process begins again and continues with breaks in the voting should the cardinals remain undecided. After 30 total votes without an election of a new pope, a change is made. The Cardinals resume voting, but now they must choose only between the two leading candidates who are barred from voting. However, the rules are firm. There can be no waiving of the requirement that there must be a clear majority of at least 2/3 of the votes of the cardinals for an election to be valid. When a cardinal reaches the 2/3 threshold of votes, 89 for this conclave, the most senior cardinal approaches the winner and asks if he accepts election. If he does, he is next asked by what name he shall be called. From that moment, he exercises full and supreme power over the universal church. As the cardinals discern who will fill the chair of St. Peter, the world eagerly watches the roof of the Sistine Chapel for white or black smoke. The smoke billows out of the chimney of a stove temporarily installed in the Sistine Chapel, shown here during the last conclave in 2013. After the white smoke marking the election of a new pope, the bells of St. Peter's ring out.
Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum.
And the senior cardinal deacon makes the announcement, Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum, habemus papam, Latin for, I announce to you great joy, we have a pope. The new pontiff is introduced on the loggia of St. Peter's Basilica and greets the world as the new pontificate begins.
I can't wait for that moment. It's going to be so exciting.
You're going to have to.
I know, that's true. I know. It sounds like we're going to be waiting for a little while. But before we get into that room and everyone who's in there, where do those cardinals of the 252 who are not going to be in the room, those 117, where do they go? What do they do?
Well, they get the extra omnes from the Domus if any of them were staying there, and they have to find their own lodging. So at the Pontifical North American College here, some of the over 80 cardinals in the from the United States are going to be staying. But all throughout the city, those who want to remain here in order to be able to greet the next Holy Father, become his collaborators, etc., are staying around either in seminaries or in religious houses or in apartments with other cardinals who might be over 80 here, who happen to be friends and have a guest room, but they're quite resourceful by the time they get to a superannuated cardinal.
And they are under oath as well. So can they do anything other than pray?
It is possible. They are under oath for what happened in the general congregations.
Right.
They're able to talk about some of their general insights about the church or about what happens on the inside without revealing any of the specific contents, like the cardinals who were telling me what happens in between the votes or where they might be able to go to use the restrooms and things like this. None of that is protected by the seal. It's what happens on the actual ballots, the scrutinies.
We've used this image, and I think we'll continue to, that we're all on a journey, and the over 80 cardinals, the cardinals who cannot now participate, they're on a journey only so far with their brother cardinals, the electors. So this is where they stop and watch them go. And we have seen this as a process too, that in the 2013 there were a lot of over 80 cardinals who may have taken part in the one in 2005, and there were a few who would have memory of the 1978 conclave, for example, but only they could go only so far too. So it's a lovely image, I think, of that journey that the cardinals are taking together, but as a church, we're taking it with them as well.
And the Constitution says that they're specifically asked to lead the whole church in prayer. So to get out into some of these churches, to help us all accompany the cardinals on the inside by their presiding over prayers on the outside.
Now, when we think about the schedule of what is actually going to be happening inside the Sistine Chapel, how much Mass and prayer really is there? What does that routine look like?
So they come over every morning to the Pauline Chapel and have a Mass in which they incorporate the morning prayer of the church, what we ordinarily call lauds. Everything's done in Latin. Normally, it's presided upon by the senior cardinal. If it goes late, maybe there's a little bit of a rotation. I asked a cardinal who's participated in previous conclaves, do they sing? Do they recite? And he simply said, Roger, we recite everything. So they're moving on. They're not going to delay the Mass by singing lengthy Gregorian chants and things like this. But they are going to go in with the Lord Jesus inside of them to help them do their job in communion with him.
And we don't want to do spoilers. for tomorrow.
That's
but,
true.
But there are certain things tomorrow that are going to be very, very profound. And we keep coming back to the Veni Creator Spiritus, the invocation in the Masses tomorrow morning of the Holy Spirit. So this is, for the cardinals, for all of us who have the privilege of watching it, this is a profound spiritual moment.
It's our sending forth tomorrow morning, our commissioning too, to pray and to really take that seriously. I mean, you've mentioned praying and fasting. I think the next 3 days are really something that our EWTN family, but the global Catholic family around the world should take seriously when it comes to praying and fasting and offering those moments to our Lord for the future of the church, and particularly in that Mass, paying special attention to calling on the Holy Spirit and meaning it, right?
Just like the early church huddled around the Blessed Virgin Mary to pray for the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, so the cardinals in the upper room of the Sistine Chapel, but also all Catholics in the upper room of the world that God has given as our common home are supposed to be in unison praying for the descent of the Holy Spirit with all of his gifts, especially the gift of wisdom and prudence upon our cardinals as they discern whom God has given the vocation to be the successor of St. Peter.
In this conclave, they may also need the cardinal virtue of fortitude.
in patience, macrothumia in Greek.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's definitely something that we can take on and pray for them, knowing that they really do have significant challenges ahead. Hopefully, as something that you've mentioned, Monsignor Landry, they will have some command of Latin to carry them through and help them center themselves in prayer before they walk in. Quickly, we talked about this order and what happens with the voting. But we haven't talked about my favorite thing, which is chatting. Are they allowed to chat while the voting is happening? What are the rules there?
So what I've been told by a few cardinals in between, there's a spirit of prayer that pervades, but it is possible to talk. But normally when people are talking in between, they're talking softly.
And there is the old tradition, too, of saying the rosary, especially during the scrutineers, as they do their work and the revisers do their work of rosaries. There was an old joke about three cardinals who were talking about how long it took them to say the rosary. and one was able to, he said he went through the whole time of the scrutinies. Well, I finished very quickly. Did you, brother?
Well, if you've ever heard Cardinal Dolan say the rosary, you know that it's lightning speed. It's quite efficient. I do have one more question then about meal times, because that would be normally a time when you would be able to talk and there aren't that many rules. But it is also tradition for many religious communities to have something read or to have a meditation. Is that listening time, or is it a moment of encounter for them as well?
When they have the meals in the Domus Sancti Marte, they're totally free to sit wherever and with whomever they want. Those are talking meals, not reading meals. So they continue their work, really. They begin to process what they've just encountered together, talk about what the next steps ought to be. I'm still told that it's all pervaded by a spirit of prayer. So they're talking about spiritual things rather than about worldly things as they stay focused. It's also a time in which announcements can be made to all of them at the same time, as well as we know in 2005, that's when Cardinal Bergoglio stood up for all those who were supporting him and said, I'm supporting Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger. And the next vote was the one that put Cardinal Ratzinger over the top. So there can likewise be speeches on the part of those who are candidates in order to be able to sway their supporters in a particular direction to bring a conclave to its conclusion.
Matthew, before we close for tonight and help our EWTN audience think about tomorrow, are all of the cardinals moved in? Are they ready to go?
I suspect if they're not, they will be by tonight. They will be ready to go. I mean, this is for so many, 108 of them, this is the first time they've ever done this. I think they are as eager to get started as everyone else is. So this could be a long and possibly sleepless night filled with prayer for a lot of them.
Well, I know that I'm excited to start here tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning, Rome time. We will be here with all of you, our EWTN family, on radio around the world. You can catch us on YouTube as well. And we'll be preparing for an hour before Mass starts. We'll have this wonderful moment of prayer. We'll be starting with the Veni Creator, with Come Holy Spirit, every single time that we gather. It'll give us that opportunity as a global family to really center ourselves and pray together before we go through these days, which will seem long, and we'll have some routine moments moments associated with them, but also, I think, some excitement in what we will hear and what we'll be able to conjecture based on when these votes happen, how quickly they happen, how efficiently these cardinals can move. So a big thank you to all of you for everything that you've done to continue to support this live coverage from St. Peter's Square. Make sure to catch Column as well, who will be doing live segments after we all gather here to give you a sense of everyone on the ground who is really coming here, as you saw with this young woman, Margaret, I believe was her name.
Magdalene,
who come here in a spirit of hope for this Jubilee, wanting to really follow in the footsteps of the last papacy and to usher in through prayer and presence, which we know was so important to Mother Angelica, for this moment in the church to walk together, all of us. And so Monsignor Landry and Dr. Bunson will be here bright and early. I'll make sure to get here on time. And we'll start with our family walking through what will be coming next. Thank you so much for being with us, and God bless you.